Hey everyone, this is Mast, and welcome to my guide on how to build AD carries in Season 4. This video is going to go over the best builds in Season 4, and I'm also going to go over the numbers in detail for the builds I talk about, and since some people won't be interested in that, I will go ahead and include some timestamps at different points in the video so that you can skip ahead. So before I talk about the full builds, I just want to say in advance that I have a set item start which I love because it gives you an incredible early game as an AD carry. By building Ninja Tabby into Ikevall into Bloodforge, you combine a lot of attack speed and a lot of power with a little bit of penetration. These three items combined are extremely strong early game and transition really well into late game because Ikevall is later replaced with Hastened, which has similar stats. I should also say that I know Bloodforge is pretty off meta, but I love this item. It gives you more power than fully stacked Devo Gloves. Devo Gloves does eventually reach 60 power, while Bloodforge immediately gives you 75. That means that you can have a really strong early game with the three items I was just talking about, which you can't do with Devourer's Gloves. Devourer's Gloves does need to be stacked up, and that takes quite a bit of time. Devo Gloves does eventually stack up to give you more lifesteal than Bloodforge, but the extra lifesteal normally won't be that important. Bloodforge will still give you enough lifesteal so that you can sustain off of the lane and off of jungle camps, and you'll still be able to solo objectives like Gold Fury or like Portal Demon. Finally, the shield on Bloodforge can actually be extremely helpful in teamfights, it's just not that reliable. So for these reasons, I do think it's completely worth buying Bloodforge over Devo Gloves, even though it's more expensive and off meta. So all that said, let's go ahead and get into the first build. This build is Ninja Tabby, Ikevall, Bloodforge, Kin Size, then you can sell Ikevall for Fatalis and pick up Executioner and finally Odysseus Bow as your last two items. This build is really strong for gods without an attack speed steroid like Anhur and Huyi. You're going to receive 246 basic attack damage and an insane attack speed of 2.41. This attack speed is extremely important because you get more damage out of Kin Size, you'll activate Odysseus Bow more often, and you'll also stack up Executioner very quickly, and it's much easier to stick to enemies with Fatalis. So this build is extremely effective against tanky targets, and it still deals a lot of damage to squishy characters as well, and it's also extremely affordable with the average item costing around 2200 gold. If you do think your ability damage late game is going to be an important part of your character or your playstyle, you can always switch out Executioner for Titan's Bane. It's going to give you less auto attack damage, but it will give you more ability damage, and it can definitely be worth it. So this build I'm talking about is a modified version of a build which I've seen some of the pro AD carries use this season, but this build offers lifesteal and more auto attack damage, and I like it much more for those reasons. The items that go with it all have passives which are very strong and work well with the build, relying on the attack speed, but it also gives you power through Bloodforge, it gives you lifesteal through Bloodforge, it gives you everything you need as an AD carry, as well as a lot of penetration against tanky targets. I'll go ahead and show you all the numbers later in the video so that you can see what I'm talking about. I've got a spreadsheet that I've used for all these builds. I've messed with the builds a lot, so I know what I'm talking about here. I've run the numbers on it. I've used multiple defensive enemies, looking at squishy targets, tanky targets who are building certain items. So I do know what I'm talking about here, and these builds are basically the final results of the builds that I thought made the most sense. So this next build is essentially the counterpart to the build I just showed you. If you do have a god that has an attack speed steroid or a crit steroid, this is going to be the build for you with pretty much no exceptions. This build also has a better late game against squishy targets than the previous build did, but it's not nearly as good against tanky targets. So the build is Ninja Tabby into Ikevall into Bloodforge, then you pick up Titan's Bane and Wind Demon. After Wind Demon, you sell Ikevall for Hastened Fatalis, and then you pick up Deathbringer as your final item. This build will just absolutely demolish squishy characters, and it works on any AD carry in the game. However, it's especially strong on AD carries with attack speed steroids or crit steroids because this build only has 1.74 attack speed and then 1.94 with the Wind Demon proc. This build also comes with 286 basic attack damage and 40% crit chance. And then you also have the Deathbringer increasing your crit damage and Wind Demon increasing your attack speed and your movement speed on critical hits. Wind Demon and Hastened Fatalis are absolutely terrifying together because with Wind Demon proc, you're actually going to be able to outrun your enemies while auto-attacking. You get an extra 20% movement speed with the Hastened effect, so you can actually get a movement speed boost while attacking your enemies. You can use this to chase, to run away, or to juke. The downsides to this build are that it does cost 1250 more gold than the last build, and you won't shred tanky targets as well as you would with a Kin's build. And now for the third and final build, here's an ability-based AD carry build which can work depending on your god and your playstyle. So this build is Warrior Tabby, Transcendence, Jotun's Wrath, Crusher, hi-rez, and then Titan's Bane. Now some of you might be screaming my eyes, but this build does actually make sense. Although the DPS numbers on it are terrible, you can deal huge amounts of burst damage by mixing auto attacks in between your damaging abilities. This is more of an Uller build than anything else, but I could see it working well on Neith and Cupid as well. If you do want some lifesteal, you can always switch out hi-rez for a Bloodforge or Crusher for an Aussie. This build gives you an insane basic attack damage of 366 with 25 flat penetration and 33% penetration. So your abilities are going to hit ridiculously hard from the mixture of power and penetration, and you're also going to have the mana from Transcendence to spam them. Crusher and Jotun's Wrath provide you with cooldown reduction to get your abilities off more often, and hi-rez gives you extra damage on basic attacks after using an ability. Again, this is not a build that I would normally recommend, but it does have a place. So now that you've taken a look at the builds, let's go ahead and do some comparison. I'm going to go ahead and start by comparing my first build, the attack speed build, to the build which I've seen some of the pros running. I'm going to put the numbers up on the screen in front of you and talk about the main differences between them. So with my build, you're going to receive lifesteal as well as the Bloodforge passive, and then you're also going to receive more damage through your auto attacks thanks to Executioner. You will lose about 25 power for getting Bloodforge instead of Transcendence, but I think that's completely worth it when you're receiving 15% lifesteal as well as the occasional Bloodforge shield. Theoretically, you could buy Transcendence and then buy Aussie for lifesteal, but Aussie doesn't really fit in well to either of the first two builds. You need a power item like Transcendence or Bloodforge, and you can't really replace Fatalis with Aussie because you'll take a massive hit to your mobility. And the rest of the items are extremely important for damage, whether it's the crit items in the second build, or the attack speed items in the first build like Kinsides, Executioner, and Oboe, which all have very strong passives that need to be utilized. So therefore, Aussie doesn't really have a place in these builds, and if you can't work in a lifesteal item to go with it, neither does Transcendence. So here are my three builds on screen for comparison. As you can see, the first build does much better against tanky targets, while the second build does much more damage versus squishy targets, and also has room to improve with an attack speed or a crit steroid. The third build doesn't even look like it compares, but if you focus on the single auto attack damage, it makes a lot more sense as the focus is for you to weave in single auto attacks between your abilities. As for which gods should use which builds, I'm not going to specify a specific build for each god, but instead just whichever build makes sense for them, I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen. So keep in mind that for build 3 that these gods will deal much more auto attack damage from one of the other builds, but will deal much more ability damage with the third build. And that wraps up the video, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. This is the first build guide that I've done, and I would love some feedback, so please do leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought. And other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time.
I've been seeking for the glory. Say my name. And I've been trying to write my own story in the search for fame. I'm sitting here in this empty room, walls keep tumbling down.